Our next panel is Streaming Music Trends, and it's presented by Securenet Systems. I'll invite the panelists to come on up. This panel will feature a discussion of online listener habits and behavior, including genres that are popular, music recommendation technology, best strategies for sharing, listening patterns, and more by a roundup of key execs at top streaming services. The panel is going to be moderated by Jim Lucchese, who is the CEO of the Echo Nest. Jim has worked at the intersection of music and technology for close to 20 years. Today, he's the CEO of the industry's leading music intelligence company, the Echo Nest, working with leading online music services, connected device manufacturers, and more to build the future of music. Under his leadership, the Echo Nest powers over 400 apps, and its customer base reaches over 100 million music fans every month. Sorry about that. Before the Echo Nest, Jim was a music lawyer at specializing in music and digital media deals, and when he's not at the Nest, he plays drums and still represents a few indie artists pro bono for fun. So please welcome Jim. Thanks.
Got the extra long bio for everybody, just for you guys. So, as Jennifer said, we're going to talk about streaming music trends. We'll kick it off with some quick introductions and then just jump right into it. Philippe, why don't you go ahead and start?
My name is Philippe Generali. I'm the president and CEO of RCS and Media Monitors and Mediabase, companies that are providing tools and services to the radio industry and to the streaming industry.
I'm Chris Boyce. I run radio for CBC, which is the public broadcaster in Canada. Part of my job is around talk, less interesting today. The part that's probably more relevant is music. So I oversee a national music conventional radio network, a couple of channels on Sirius XM, and CBC Music, which is a new digital music service that we launched about 18 months ago in Canada.
Hi, I'm Brian Lakamp, president of digital at Clear Channel Media and Entertainment. I'm responsible for our network of over 850 digital radio station properties, as well as a property called iHeartRadio.
I'm Eric Davich, the chief content officer and co-founder of Songza. I basically oversee all of our content partnerships, marketing and business development related to content. That's about it.
All right, well, I guess just to kick it off, one of the really interesting advantages in streaming is that you've got a two-way conversation with the listener. That listener is interacting often, expressing what they like, what they don't like. So you've got implicit feedback and then also explicit feedback across social media, etc. So first question for you guys is, what are some of the most interesting or surprising trends in listener behavior that you guys have seen recently? Eric?
So we launched our music concierge service in March of 2012, and at that time we sort of bet on the idea that we could expertly curate music and map it to your lifestyle. And so we made a huge bet on that, made that the number1 and pretty much only thing that you could come and use Songza for, and that bet paid off in a big way. So the trend being that people not only are listening to music to make what they're doing better, but that we as a music streaming service can curate for every moment of their life.
You know, we spend a lot of time listening to our consumers, and using social is a great example of a great forum to listen to what consumers want, what pain points they have, and you know, when we release product and before we release product, we actively talk to that audience. You know, one example from a year ago that was it was really funny. I mean, I didn't. You probably wouldn't guess what the most requested feature for iHeartRadio was a year ago. If you and I've done this in a bunch of rooms, most people didn't guess, but it was alarm clock, and it was about something very simple, listening to what consumers wanted. When we launched that at CES this year, consumers were delighted. Every release that we do, we monitor our social feeds and what consumers are saying, respond within an hour to the pain points that people are having, the delight points that they have. We echo those as well, and it's a really important channel for us to forge a two-way conversation. Radio itself, though, has always been, I mean, despite the fact it's a broadcast medium, has always been an inherently social medium. With call-in shows, it's about community, it's about conversation. For us, that social started 2 years ago when we first launched iHeartRadio in partnership with Facebook to do some innovative things around the open graph and how to share your music. But recently, the announcement that we made around talk radio, it's about amplifying different aspects of community and social that live within the product and connecting people to authentic voices, talking about real issues. And so it's really about using technology to uncover social connections in very different ways that are the core of what radio's always been.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's been interesting for us just seeing how different the listening experience is depending what genre of music you're listening to, which I think is partially demographic. So, we look at the listening to our classical music channels. Almost all of it is on the web, I think upwards of 80%. The flip side of that is you look at how people are consuming, genres like, hip hop, pop, and it's almost all on mobile. So we're beginning to see a much more nuanced sense of a wide-ranging audience crossing a lot of different demos and usage patterns, consuming the content in very different ways. I think the other thing, just in terms of looking at how people are consuming, that's been interesting to see is I think we often in the industry imagine that there are broadcast listeners or there are digital listeners, so that people live in the ecosystem of a single service. And I think what we're seeing a lot is people who are consuming all over the place. They use Songza, but they might also use iHeart, or they might also use Pandora while they're consuming broadcast. And I actually saw some really interesting from research that back in the spring, which actually said consumers of Pandora are more likely to consume broadcast as well. So I think in the industry, we often imagine the listener just stuck in one of these ecosystems, and the reality is they live full lives that cross back and forth between them.
And we found at Media Monitors we have a measure that we came up with, which is called M-Score, which we worked on with our partner Arbitron, which studies the behavior of listeners. Do they switch away when the song is playing? And we had the chance of working with some of our clients. We supply services to about 900 streaming stations around the world. And when you look at the thumbs up and the thumbs down data compared to the behavioral data, there's some very interesting parallel. Even though people are voting, they're not exactly acting based on the voting. It has a parallel with what they actually do, especially when you look at some format. For example, in rhythmic CHR, a rap song will tend to have a very early adoption, and you will see that by the number of thumbs up that you have very early on rhythmic CHR specifically, because people will listen to the lyrics and like that a lot. So these are interesting comparisons based on the format.
So I guess for Philippe and Chris first, you mentioned different platforms or formats influencing, or relations between formats in genre listening. Have you seen that formats driving programming and sequencing decisions from a programming standpoint, clustering based on platform or listener type? Are we there yet, or is that coming?
It's an interesting dilemma because you, as a streamer, for example, we work with Polish radio. The public service is very open, and there's a very strong Polish community overseas. So they are very strong on their streaming side, and we installed G-Selector there and gave them the ability to program 100 channels by just entering one song in one database and having control over that. And then they they worked on that for about a year, and they came back to us and said, we think that the best way to raise the overall satisfaction and the number of thumbs up is to actually add another 100 channels. And they did just that. And now, in 2014, we've said they'll probably go to 300 because that's the way to do it. So it's exactly that. You segment your channels, and you increase the satisfaction of each of the channels, listener.
Although it is an interesting question, because I think eventually you hit the point of too much choice, right?
Yeah.
Where the consumer becomes overwhelmed, and they may be satisfied if they can ever find the choice they want.
But custom radio is that. It's your
yeah.
one station. It's the ultimate segmentation, right?
Well, and I think what's interesting about the example you gave is I think it is that notion of applying some of the conventional principles of radio programming to internet radio. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily widely thought of in the field, the basic principles of rotation, placement, all of that kind of stuff. And I think there's a bunch of reasons that those effective principles drive tuning and drive satisfaction. And for us, at least, that's a huge opportunity. And I think it's also a huge opportunity in that, that notion of rotation is very important to introduce people to new music. And if we want to live in a world where people continue to discover new music, and discovery is a huge value for us, we need to use the tools that allow people to discover rather than just continue to consume the music that they already like.
Yeah, you touched on, I guess, we'll try to transition it a bit. You touched on that collaboration between technology, data, all the new feedback that's available to you, and quote, more traditional radio programming techniques. And certainly in the early days at the Echo Nest, we were working more with a hard drive in the sky without really a sense of radio programming, and over the years worked more and more with radio programmers, which has been an eye-opening experience. So you read a lot about a man versus machine argument, and certainly we feel that that's a kind of a stupid way to look at things. In the end, the greatest examples out there are collaborations between great radio programming, great radio personality, and technology, and each of you guys are applying those in different ways. I'd love for you to talk about that a bit. And seeing that I cut you off, you should probably go first.
No, I mean, well, that's the heart of the way that we program. I mean, as you well know, we work closely with Echo Nest, use the Echo Nest data as one part of what we do at iHeartRadio. We pair that up with our programming knowledge and the expertise of our programmers from around the country. And it really is. I mean, it's not a, sorry, Kurt, to one up your nerd references, but it's not a Sarah Connor Schwarzenegger type battle. It's actually a union of the two, and figuring out how to take the best of both and provide increasingly compelling consumer experiences.
I mean, and both of you guys were hinting at a couple of things that I'm going to talk about before. One is, talking to users. One thing for us, we're obviously music nerds, but we're also obsessed with our users and what makes them tick, what their daily routine is like, what the ups and downs are. And we talk to them on a regular basis in a very conversational format. And one thing, aside from realizing that they needed curation, was realizing that they needed something with personality. They needed an application that wasn't purely transactional, that didn't require an input on their end. When you see a blank search box, it's hard to imagine yourself having a relationship with that. Whereas when you come to a screen on Songza that has a lot of very humanized things like getting lucky on a Saturday night, or waking up happy, even some very basic daily behaviors.
What is the song? What are the top tunes for getting lucky on a Saturday night?
Well, that gets into my next point. So once you pick getting lucky, then we allow you to refine and personalize based on your behavior and your habits and the kind of person that you are. So
How lucky you
might see exactly like you might see when you click getting lucky, we might ask you to choose your approach. Do you want to do something aggressive? Do you want to be smooth? Do you want to be just easygoing? There's a lot of options, and we'll optimize that based on your behavior. So if every Saturday night you're getting lucky and you're doing something sexy and seductive, then we're going to make sure to show you that on a regular basis. And then beyond that, when we show you 3 playlists, we're going to make sure that those are the ones that you want at that place and that time based on any sort of data that we've gathered about you, be it the time of the day of the week, the device you're on, your demographic information, your Facebook information if you've given that to us, and then your personal preferences and behavior.
So this is music scaling very close to what's done in terrestrial. It's interesting because the curation of the library is one thing, and you guys do a phenomenal job, you know, coding 7 million songs. But how they're scheduled, how often they come on the air is very important. And 40 years ago, 50 years ago, in the 60s, that's how top 40 radio was invented. I mean, there's many different stories about how it was invented, the jukebox story and so forth. But this one is one of them. And in the 60s, there was a light in the studio, pretty much like this one, except it was off. And every time it was going red, the DJ has to pick that one song, that 145 at the time, and put it on the turntable and play it. And it was going red every hour. And that was the invention of the top 40. That's how some of the songs of the Beatles became hit, just because radio decided to work on the scheduling and saying, you know what, rather than having the DJ play it once in a while when they like it, we've got to be very, very, very precise about when we want to get it scheduled and when it plays on the air. And that's a huge part of the experience. Scaling the music, when your listener are listening to your stream, they stay around for 20, 15, 10 minutes. You have to give them a representative sample of what your library is at that time, because you have one shot at it.
It is amazing how far we've come, right? And you know, and I look at the tools that we had as music programmers. You know, I don't know, even a few years ago, that stations used to do auditorium tests where you drag people in, play them 5 seconds of a song, and based on whether they like the 5 seconds of the song, you'd try to figure out whether that was something you were going to put in rotation. You contrast that to the rich data that you get from listening behavior, the kind of stuff that you're collecting, to the kind of interaction that we have on social media, and in a short period of time, it feels like we're in a world that's as different as the red light and what that means to programming in a system like Selector or any sort of music rotation system. All that said, and this I guess comes back to that sort of man versus machine thing. Ultimately, I think for the consumer, so much of music is about a human connection. I think Eric, what you were saying about personality, I don't think can be understated, and I think good services find personality in different ways. I think Songza has done a really good job of sort of taking what could be a mechanical or algorithmic thing and putting a personality on it. But I think ultimately consumers identify with personality, and whether it's making better music programming or it's creating the illusion that that guy that you've always been a fan of is now programming a custom 24/7 station for you. I just think in terms of the consumer impact, you cannot underestimate personality, and I worry sometimes the industry, myself included, becomes so obsessed with the next bright, shiny object that allows us to program a technically better music experience that we've lost sight of what actually connects with consumers.
So, I guess following on this, on the personality point, and you guys have touched on social from a standpoint of social as a great feedback loop to better understand your audience, better program to your audience, connect with your audience, engage around community. What about the consumer as a curator? What about that next level of social and having your listeners express their preference in some ways and engage? There's been a lot of ink spilled around, quote, social music, and V1 of social music largely, I think, included you as a music listener spewing a lot of your listening activity diagnostically into various social graphs. And in some ways, from a programming standpoint, that's valuable. From a user experience standpoint, do you see the music fan getting up on stage more as a passionate fan? Do you see making connections among music fans as part of driving community and engagement?
It's about finding the curators that you trust, and that's one thing that radio has been a part of radio for a long time, but it's also part of the promise of the social experience. And what you're referencing a couple of years ago with the open graph sort of introducing people to what you and your friends are listening to, well, but part of the challenge in that is that I may have 600 friends, but I don't trust all of their music taste. And there are a smaller subset of those that are the curators of discovery that I trust alongside my radio stations and the programmers that we have. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us and all of you as folks that participate in programming decisions and curating services is to build better, more personalized, more personable sort of services that take curation to increasingly sophisticated levels.
I just want to say on the record, I hate the term social music or social radio,
Thank
and
you.
I think it got thrown around a lot by the industry, and it was sort of like, social's hot, we want to be hot, let's just put the two together. You know, I remember being on a panel with Kurt up in Canada at some point in the last year, and I think we all looked at the, you know, that was supposed to be about social music, we looked at it like, what the hell is this actually about? I think social is a huge part of music. Music is inherently social. I think there's some companies out there, we did some work with Jumpwire earlier this year, who I think have a really good understanding of the social ecosystem. But I think really what it comes down to at the end of the day is less of the buzzword and imposing upon this notion that we must be social. And I think it comes down to what is the human behavior that goes into music and how do we replicate that in the digital space, right? So when I
think
grew
that's
up,
right.
we made mixtapes, right? So there was something about mixtapes. I didn't listen to everyone's mixtape. I like some people's mixtapes more than others. And I think the more we think about the human behavior and map it to the digital experience, the better off we're going to be.
I mean, on Songza, we've noticed a couple of things in terms of social. One, music is, yes, it is inherently social, but more importantly, it's very, very personal. And most of the time, when people are listening to music, they don't want to share what they're listening to. You know, especially if you're getting lucky or if you're working out. Like, who cares? Like, what do I want to tell the world what I'm listening to when I'm sleeping? You know, that's personal to me. The things that people like sharing is what we were talking about before, which is personality. You come to Songza, you might see looking at pictures of your ex as an option. That's what you share. You say, wow, I can't believe that this app that's my cool friend in my pocket has told me that I'm looking at pictures of my ex right now. I'm looking at pictures of my ex right now with a pint of Ben & Jerry's, sobbing and listening to breakup songs. This is hilarious. This is what I want to share. This is what I want to broadcast. So, and then in terms of having your social network curate for you, you know, that's also a little bit different. You know, my mom's in my social network. I don't necessarily care what kind of music she listens to. I also don't want her to make a playlist for me. You know, I trust music experts, people who are journalists, people who are musicians, producers, artists in some cases, who are really, really passionate about a specific subgenre, like a mixtape, you know, making a really great soundtrack for a particular situation. I know that R. Kelly is going to make an awesome slow jams playlist for Getting Lucky called, you know, that's got his song Bump and Grind in it. You know, like, I know that, you know, Pitchfork is going to make a really great, critically acclaimed playlist of stuff. So we've found that people insist on expert curation over social curation for sure.
So you're saying that R. Kelly's Get Lucky playlist would be on the mellow versus aggressive side?
I think it would be on this categorized as smooth and sexy.
Okay, all right. You touched on the idea of personality, on curation, on the idea of expressing musical identity. And part of personality and programming is you're also a promotional partner to the music that you're spinning, that you're playing. And riding that line and showing your passion for what you're putting in front of an audience is kind of the hallmark of great programming. Do you see that line going further? I mean, you mentioned guest mixtapes, celebrity-driven playlisting. Certainly every great musician is probably not a great, can't create a great playlist. But how do you see that evolving, meaning the role of artists actually having more of a presence or a voice in streaming?
Well, we see some DJs that are being introduced to some of the streaming channels. Some of the customer we have actually using totally conventional equipment, staying almost away from IP until not the last mile, but the last millimeter. They will schedule the music in the music scheduling system. They will play it on an automation system, and they will have some DJ that will voice track, and that will help connect with the audience a little bit more. So that's certainly a difference in selling the record.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's really been about thinking about our service not just as a listening experience, but as a a music experience where there's an opportunity to tell stories for people to, watch content, read articles, and we do see that notion of the rich content that goes along with the music experience as being important. Now that's easier for us because we're a broadcaster. We work across radio, television, digital, but I do worry, or I wonder sometimes whether we're beginning to divorce the process of telling stories about music and telling compelling stories about musical artists from listening. And I think there is an opportunity to weave all of that together.
Do you know, have you observed whether or not your online listeners who are engaging in kind of supporting content, storytelling stuff, are they typically more engaged, higher value visitors than folks that are just there to listen to music?
It's interesting. We asked that exact question. The one thing, and we don't have the answer, although we're trying to dig down on some of that. The one thing that we've observed is that over the last 6 months, we're actually growing the content side of the site and the business faster than we're growing the streaming side. And I think there is an appetite, and some of it is, I think there's, the Canadian market's a little bit different, but there's not as much competition or investment in the content side as there is in the listening experience. So I think it's an opportunity in the market as well.
Is that content exclusive, or is it just supporting information about artists, or both?
For us, it's mostly exclusive, but then again, we're also in the business of creating radio and television content, so the digital, content becomes sort of the multi-platform play.
Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we know that the personalities and hosts create a connection on a station that is something that people have enormous value in, and they treat a lot of hosts like they are friends. You talk to people about their relationship with an Elvis Duran in New York, and it's one of their close friends that they want to hear the gossip from, and it's really pretty remarkable. And we do work with personalities and sometimes build brands and stations with talent. Good example of that is a year ago we started an EDM channel with Pete Tong, who's prominent in the EDM community, and built up a station called Evolution, which interestingly started in digital, gained momentum. We built up a tribe around that and a sort of a mentality. We were a beacon to a tribe, and took that to Boston and to Miami. And so it's an interesting transition of not just digital or broadcast into digital, but digital feeding back into broadcast as well.
And in your case, the idea of programming in that relationship goes even beyond broadcast and digital. How do you look at events and all of the rest of the different touch points you've got in building that relationship?
Yeah, I think we're in a somewhat unique position because of the assets that we have. This weekend we have our little tea and sandwiches affair in Vegas, the iHeartRadio Music Festival that we're really excited about, and all of those are touch points, whether it's outdoor, whether it's our 20,000 events or our radio stations or digital. They're just touch points to connect consumers and connect people with their passions and the music.
I believe the original question was how we work with artists, right?
Yeah.
So we work with artists in many capacities. One is programming their music, passing it along to our team of curation experts and programming it in relevant playlists. So you could hear the new track from Sheryl Crow and say, this is really great for unwinding. We're going to put it in our country unwinding playlist so that people hear it and it gets more spins and people discover it in a contextually relevant way. Beyond that, we work with artists, not just artists, but also celebrities and even brands to curate lifestyle enhancing playlists. So we're a lifestyle service. We're not strictly a music service. You don't come to Songza to consume music. You come to Songza to make what you're doing better. And who better to curate for those moments than people or brands that are experts in those particular scenarios. So if you're, like I mentioned before, like R. Kelly would be the perfect guy to curate for Slow Jams for Getting Lucky, but as would Trojan for Getting Lucky, right? Or when you're working out, Flo Rida is an artist who works out a lot, and he made a really awesome Getting Fit playlist. But so is Alex Morgan, who is a professional soccer player, made a really great workout mix for us as well. So you can imagine, celebrity chefs making great cooking soundtracks, or mixologists making great cocktail party playlists. And in some cases, our editorial team will even pretend that they're a television show character like Walter White from Breaking Bad and curate a Cooking with Walter White type playlist or something like that.
All right, well, I'm going to switch gears away from that and talk about international for a moment. So in the last year, we've seen a number of the expansion of a DMCA-type listening experience outside of the U.S., and it appears that some of the licensing issues that were one of the barriers to globalizing that type of interactive listening experiences are starting to come down. How do you guys see the expansion of market entrants globally impacting the businesses that you're in today, and how do you view those markets as opportunities?
Well, there's international and international. So, for example, are you international?
I don't know. Canada? Close?
Okay.
Semi-international.
In the UK, for example, they can't stream over here because they would have to pay the rights, and their UK radio player, which is like a standard tuner in the industry, the guys did a great job of having everybody rally around their app, is very strong, but it's purely UK. And but we have clients in China, and you can do absolutely anything you want, of course. So be worried about Chinese internet streaming coming over here maybe, and just never be able to catch them, and they'll be able to do whatever they want. So it depends on the country, really.
Sure. I guess more specifically, with DMCA type licenses now being direct licensing opportunities, allowing U.S.-based services to potentially expand internationally, and the other way around, how do you see that impacting? Whether it's new market entrants that you've got to now contend with, or whether it's new opportunities that you see in markets that otherwise were more difficult to get at before.
Well, I would say, as the guy who's sitting in a market that right now is very not crowded, the stereotypical point of view that I should take is that increased competition is not a good thing. I actually believe the exact opposite of that, and I believe the more competition you have in a market, the faster the acceleration of listeners moving to digital consumption happens. And I think that's a critical challenge that we face right now. And I think Canada is actually a perfect case study of that, right? So I was looking at some data the other day. 18% of people in the United States say they listen to an internet-only streaming service daily. In Canada, that number is 4%. Right? 4%, 18%. What that says to me is because there's not enough competition in the market, people actually aren't adapting to a different way of consuming content. So actually the best thing that could probably happen for me right now would be that, a new service, Pandora and Spotify probably being the most obvious ones, move into the market, create interest in consumption of digital music, and everybody lifts up. So I actually think more competition is a good thing.
I mean, speaking of Canada, we first launched in the U.S. and then last August we launched in Canada, and I don't know if any of you, except for Chris here, are familiar with sort of what happened, but we amassed 1 million Canadian registered users in 70 days, which compared to America, that would be equivalent of like 20 million Americans. So for us, international expansion has been huge. It's really, really, really hard, and the structures that are set up here in the U.S. and also the deals that we were able to negotiate in Canada aren't easily replicable elsewhere at the moment. It would be amazing if they were. That would be incredible. But then the other problem for us is localization. So much of what we do is the personality and the curation. And pre-gaming with friends doesn't necessarily translate to Chinese people. And so we need to be able to have, we're a very small company right now, 28 people, and we would need to grow and localize in order to launch in any other country, even England. Like you could imagine, we need to curate for every moment of people's lives. Us Americans don't know a thing about curating a great soundtrack for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, or what the perfect playlist is for afternoon tea. So for us, it would be a huge investment to launch in any other country that we're not in right now.
Yeah, for us, it's baby steps. I wouldn't say that there's a solution that we see on a global basis at this point. We just took a first step in Australia and New Zealand with a set of partner stations that we have out there, and for us, it's exactly that. It's just a baby step and an exploratory step.
So I guess playing that out in say developing markets, say Latin America. Take Latin America, for example. I mean, one question is, are some of the global streaming players with licenses in virtually every territory on an on-demand basis versus pure plays in those territories? You point out really the core issue there, which is a localized experience there. Well, I guess to you, Chris, do you see CBC potentially having a voice on some of these on-demand services? Meaning, if from a programming standpoint and identity standpoint, if all the content is there or much of it is there, and there's a huge need to curate atop it, do you see that as an opportunity and actually potentially a new platform?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that notion of localizing the content, whether it's the playlists you choose or just the personality of the service, is critically important. I guess if there's something that the question you originally asked, is there fear of big players with global licensing deals, essentially, securing terms so advantageous they put push other players out? Yeah, is that a concern? Absolutely. But I think there is something about the importance of localization and matching the content and the personality to the market that is either going to present the opportunity for those regional or local players, or is going to impede, the growth of global services sort of unchecked. I'm imagining an ecosystem again where there's opportunities for both, and I guess that to me still comes back to that point earlier, is that we sort of imagine the world as this sort of either-or universe. Everyone's either in this camp or this camp, and I think the reality is most markets and even most individual consumers use a variety of services in a variety of different situations.
This being said, I agree with the Queen and the special music for the tea parties, but rock is rock, and I think there's a shot. If you guys had the job for it, I mean, there'd be huge takers. I don't know about the advertising revenue. That's a totally different story, of course. But getting the listeners.
Well, if you can convince that the rights holders to come up with a structure that's similar to the DMCA, then I would love to chat with them. But in the meantime, it doesn't look like that's happening anywhere soon.
I'm not sure. No.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, we work with a lot of on-demand services, and we work with streaming radio services, and we've seen that for the on-demand services, kind of race number one was race to 20 million tracks in the catalog. It doesn't matter what they are, we need 20 million of them. And then there was a global expansion, and because in many of these markets, this is kind of found money, getting licensed in those territories was a lower barrier for many of these companies, Eastern Europe, Latin America, et cetera. But with no local programming presence, with no local content ingestion team to kind of bring in local content, there may be licenses there and the service may be there, but there isn't yet a business to kind of put feet on the ground. We've rolled out services in Japan, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and most of those services that have been successful have been pure plays in that territory because they have that localized understanding.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point in that you can license music for a territory, but that doesn't mean that you can build any brand awareness in that territory. And I think ultimately that's an advantage that Clear Channel and CBC have, is that we can instantly build brand awareness. And I think that's why the RDO Cumulus deal this week is interesting. Is it going to solve that problem? But I think that's a chronic problem. I see so many services launching, and you wonder, how are they ever going to build that kind of connection with consumers in the territory they've licensed?
Yeah, the Australia and New Zealand launch for us also is about having a dedicated programming team that understands what it means to be local, be focused on a community, speak to that community, and echo that through the platform, and that's why that works there for us. And so that's not something that you solve in one fell swoop on a global level, for sure.
All right, so we're down to just a couple minutes here. One last question for you guys, and then we'll open it up. Anyone can take this. When discussing streaming music, generally, whether it's on this panel or anywhere else, what is the question or topic that annoys or pisses you off the most? It could be that question.
How do you monetize? How do you become a profitable business? I mean, we get the same question that Pandora gets all the time, I'm sure. It's like, well, sure, you guys are growing, but your costs are going to rise the bigger that you get. How do you deal with that? And for us, we haven't really proven ourselves, but we get to sell the future when we answer that question. And for us, the future is in what we call native advertising. So not your strict traditional ad units where there's display or video pre-roll or audio ads midstream, but rather actually working with brands to curate the content that you're consuming. The reason that people come to Songza is to go through these experiences to make what they're doing better, and brands can provide that. So people end up engaging directly with the brands as opposed to ignoring them. And the reaction that we've had so far from some of these campaigns with folks like Taco Bell and Samsung and Victoria's Secret, et cetera, has been really great. And so people, to your question, your first question, what is a surprising trend that we've seen? It's been that people like engaging with brands on our platform. They're sharing it, they're getting excited, they're posting photos of the Taco Bell icon on Instagram, saying, "How did Songza know that I needed a taco right now?" And that. So for us, we answer that question a lot. We haven't yet had a chance to really prove that our theory is correct on a large scale, but from what we've seen so far, we think we're doing a pretty good job with it.
Anyone else angry about something?
Yeah. One question that I get is, what's your digital strategy? And that one frustrates me simply because, and we say this a lot, we don't have a digital strategy. We have a brand strategy, echoing the brand point. For us, it's about creating brand connections and meaningful connections to consumers. And whether that's through digital, and we can use technology to amplify that in unique ways, that's what we do through digital. But for us, it's really not a digital strategy per se. It's a brand strategy.
Great. Well, we're down to 2 minutes here, so unless you guys are really upset about something.
I'm not as angry.
Okay.
And for me, it's music scheduling, obviously. The listener can tell you some, but you gotta help and do a little more of a lean back experience so that the experience overall can be enhanced.
You didn't seem very angry, Philippe. All right, we'll open it up. Any questions? Go ahead.
Can you talk about the effect of Reddit on music? With Songza, we would have a debate, I think, about curation, whether people who are curating it are someone I actually want to hear from. But when you look at something like Reddit, which is all being voted up, voted down, is there a music service like this, or you're seeing like that? Is that how you get the data from? This seems to be, the crowd seems to be much more important than someone curating.
Turntable FM did that.
Yeah.
But they're not really leading any market right now. In 2010, before we thought that curation was the be all and end all, we launched a social radio product. And what we found was that you have to really govern people in order to get a good listening experience. Social radio, social collaborative playlisting can be great for making a readable list, but it doesn't make a good listening experience. Because if you say, hey, these are the best workout songs of all time, what I'm going to say is the best workout song of all time is going to be different from what you say is the best workout song of all time, and you put that together in a listening experience, it's going to be very jarring, right? Especially if people aren't following the rules of select one song only. Because somebody in this room might decide that Led Zeppelin's first album, every single song in order is the best thing to listen to while working out, bar none. And they're going to totally disagree with the person who says that Flow Ride is Good Feelin' is the best workout song.
Isn't that when the algorithm comes to point? It's like, because when you look at Reddit, you look at RDO, you look at iTunes, even Netflix, I mean, they spend a lot of time on these algorithms to make sure that when the crowd puts input, what comes out the other end is actually what everybody believes. And I look at RDO and I look at my
Sure, that's a great article to read.
We're going to have to end there and conclude by saying that Led Zeppelin 1 is the best, in order, thing to listen to while working out. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.